Okay, could we all get seated? Good morning, everyone. Hope everyone had a nice evening. Hello, Warren. You emerged from the background. And I'm sure Josephine's going to join us in a moment as well. We have a busy day ahead of us. We're going to start with audit evidence and risk response, then switch to experts. And then in the afternoon, get an update from GRI and turn back to going concern. So this morning, we sort of had a little bit of our appetites whetted yesterday with the technology effort because of it's in a relation with audit evidence and risk response, but we're going to turn to the project proposal and hopefully get towards conclusions on the project proposal by the end of the week. So I'm going to hand it over to Jasper, who's sitting patiently beside me. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Tom. And good morning, everyone. I will do the introduction, and then we have Anna and Henken who will guide you through the various questions. If we can go to the next slide. So here you see the group that worked on the project proposal. So from the staff side, we have Anna, Henken, and myself, and then of course supported by Megan. Then we have the focus group, which consists of Julie, Vishal, Sachiko, Edo, and Warren, which is still not coming out of the South African flag on your slide, as he does on the screen.
Would have been better to have a red teapot for him.
Maybe we'll change that for Thursday. So thank you everyone on this. So from the focus group, of course, and also from thank you for your inputs that we received in the development of this further development of this project proposal. If you can go to the next slide. So the objective of today is really to get your views and your input on the project proposal. We will then present it to you on Wednesday again. An updated draft, and then it's for approval on Thursday on the agenda. So we already have received a lot of offline comments from the board. So thank you for that. It's really helpful to have up front. And we've been going through it and starting to address those as well. So we'll take this into account. If you haven't done it yet, haven't sent us offline comments, still feel free to do so. But given the short turnaround, preferably quickly after this meeting. And of course, the other thing, if you have any, even if you have provided offline comments, please discuss your more substantive points, because then we can also get input from the board if needed. If you can go to the next slide. So the next slide shows a little bit what we have done since the September meeting. It's basically a lot of refining the project proposal that we presented to you then. So we based the changes that we made are based on comments from the boards that you made in September, both the offline and the comments made during the plenary. Then we obtained the input from the focus group as well, which we included in the project proposal as well. And then we liaised with various other groups to get their input and to make sure that it is aligned, and that we, for example, on professional skepticism, get the right focus on that as well. Specifically, also we spoke to Sue and Kalina on the audit evidence aspects of the project proposal, and with Angelo and his team, including Anna, who's talking to herself then. No, so about the technology aspects, and of course there's what you would have seen that in the appendix to the issues paper, we've included a gap analysis where we link the actions from the technology gap analysis to what we have in our project proposal, so it's easier for everyone to follow. And then lastly, we also ran this project proposal by the ethics board, the staff of the ethics board, to get their input as well. So in addition to what's here on this slide, we also made some further changes because of due process, which will be discussed later today. Some changes to the due process in the executive session. But we already have aligned our project proposal with the new due process, just to make sure in the case it's approved that we, because most of this project will be will be further developed under the new due process, so that we are aligned. The main change from that is you will see in the section on the stakeholders who are impacted. That's been added. Lastly, the other thing, we've also been liaising with the International Association for Accounting, Education and Research. They are going to perform some research in the coming weeks, so like late December and early January, on some of the topics, like for example, why are auditors not doing control testing, or like what is withholding them from doing that, together on some of these topics where we need to do a little bit more further digging and get directional input. They will do some interviews with partners and senior managers in firms to get their insights. So the last thing that you see on this slide is on the further information gathering. In the September board meeting, we were asked to look at some inspection reports from jurisdictions outside Europe and North America, which we have done. So we've reviewed inspection reports from Japan, Singapore, India, Malaysia, and also thanks to some board members around this table who helped us getting these reports. So we reviewed those reports, and based on that, we haven't identified any new issues. And with that, I hand it over to Henken, who will guide you through section 1 and 2 of the project proposal.
Michelle, next slide, please. Okay, so before I hand it over to Tom for the board's discussion, I just want to give some flavor about the changes that we made to these sections. So at the very start of the project proposal, we highlighted the stakeholder needs that trigger the development of this project proposal. We also deleted some duplicative material that's elsewhere in the proposal. Most importantly, we clarify the interrelationship between this project proposal and the IAASB work on the technology position. And then lastly, we made changes to enhance the overall flow of the project proposal. For example, we moved the timeline further down. And with that, Tom, I hand it over to you for first set of questions.
Okay, we're focused on sections 1 and 2 here, paragraphs 1 to 23 of agenda paper 5A, or I assume 5B too, since lots of us use the track changes format. Okay, any comments? Okay, so I think it's not surprisingly, these are introductory and reflect the comments that we've received at other board meetings. Okay, so why don't we continue to move on?
Anna.
Thank you. So, Michelle, if you go to the next slide, we're basically taking this section by section ultimately at this point. So sections 3 and 4. So 3 reflects the project objectives, where the main change was to bifurcate the objective on technology, really, from what used to be one objective. And section 4, which is the new section, as Jasper described, that was introduced to really highlight the consideration of the different needs of different stakeholders, and really highlight that that is part of the process of a project delivered by the IAASB. So I'll leave Tom.
Okay, any questions and comments on the project objectives? Remember, the project objectives are really important, particularly when you think about our due process and our accountabilities, because ultimately we will have to assess at the end of the day whether the output meets the project objectives, and based upon the evidence and the due process, the feedback we've gotten, does the conclusion appropriately and legitimately address those project objectives. So we want to make sure that we get these right up front. So when well, we're returning to the PIOB for certification and our external stakeholders, we have something to answer to. Okay, Bill, and then on.
Just on that point, Tom, it's something that I've struggled with, and just for the sake of new members, can we just say a few more words about the flexibility or inflexibility we have once the project plan is agreed?
We could modify a project proposal, but of course that will have to be evidence-based and in a public session. Like, it has to be, oh, we've learned something because of our consultation or our research, because I don't view project proposals as static. And just confirming that that's consistent with our understanding of the due process. But it would have to come to the board and a decision be made to do that.
I get that. I guess it's a matter of degree. I'm finding them when I often hear we have to do X because that's all the project plan suggested. I don't sense there's a lot of flexibility once a project plan is agreed. Maybe that's just my misinterpretation, but I think in this particular case, we do need to keep our eyes open very much for as we go forward.
So we're gonna call in Billy in a second. Yeah, I think, remember, we're reaching our project proposal because we've done a lot of work to get here. So the bias should be to stick to our original objectives, and it would have to be something significant that would change our mind. What's really important right now is in the further evolution and of our due process and accountabilities, that we really, with the emphasis on the PIF, we want to be sure that we got the project objectives right, because from our standpoint, our accountability is much better focused on achieving the project objectives than on getting into discussions with oversight on specific decisions being made on technical topics. So, Billy?
Thank you, Tom. So just to confirm, you're quite right. We can adjust the project proposal. As Tom said, it has to be an informed decision that will have to come back to the board, and the board will have to vote on that. I think the other thing we need to keep in mind is just to add on to what Tom has just said. I think it is a clear commitment that we make. And that commitment has implications for resource allocation, time allocation, how we balance that project with other projects and so on. So yes, we can make changes, but that will always have to be in the context of, well, what's the effect on this on resources? What's the effect on this on other projects, etc. The other thing we need to be careful of is scope creep, because otherwise you're going to continue to add on to things, whereas you want to get to a product and get it finished. So it's going to be a little bit of a balancing act. So yes, it's possible, but with some of those caveats.
Okay, Anand?
Thank you, Tom. Well, first of all, congratulations to the team for the work done so far. I have a point with the paragraph 24C. The third objective is to facilitate and where appropriate, encourage auditors' use of technology, blah, blah, blah. I believe that when we say encourage auditors' use, we should incorporate, encourage, or require auditor use of technology. Because if in the future we require the use of some technology when we revise the different ISAs in the project, maybe it could be understood that it is out of the project.
Okay. Wendy?
Thank you, Tom. And thank you, Bill, because I struggled with the same connectivity or actions and how it actually flows through. And I have been, this is the end of my 4th year, and there are a lot of comments, or often when we're discussing the actual exposure draft, it does come back to the project proposal, and we are, the sometimes it seems a bit inflexible. So I think I understand that to revisit the project proposal, and Tom, really, you can respond to this, it actually does have to come back to the board, and it has to be some sort of action to do that. And that's, I guess, why it's really important that the words are very flexible for explore. And quite honestly, when I see explore, sometimes I feel like there are some foregone conclusions, even though we're using the word explore. So I'll pause here in case you want to respond to that, and then I have some other comments.
Okay. Let's go to Sue.
Thanks. And I also found that first intervention and the subsequent discussion helpful, because I think the project proposal status, in some areas we have quite a lot of outreach and information to inform, particularly the things that draw on the audit evidence where we've gone through exposure and so on. And then you've got other areas like tests of control and substantive analytical procedures that are at a much earlier stage in the process. And so I think it is important that we have the flexibility to be able to listen to what we hear from the outreach and really kind of drill down into what the problem is that we're trying to fix. And I'm not sure that we actually know that at this point. So I was encouraged by that, and similar to Wendy's comment, I think where we are at that explore stage, I prefer that kind of openness of language, because we don't want to prejudge what the exploration might come up with, and it might be something really big, and it might be nothing. So we need to be conscious of that. And then I had a number of comments sort of throughout, but I'll make it as an overarching comment around scalability, because some of the issues that are coming up on the project plan are tending to be quite high-end issues. And in the context of scalability, I actually probably just wanted to put the alternative view to what Hernan said about the requiring the use of technology, because I think at the objective stage, then it probably is around encouraging. When you get into the detail, then maybe there are situations where a requirement is appropriate. So that was the comment on the objectives point. Thanks.
Thank you. Greg?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to the team to getting us to this point. I just had a separate point just on the second sentence in para 27. That felt like an overarching aim, if you like, high quality audits and delivering those for users. So I wondered if that sort of sat above the objectives and could be blended into the lead in to para 24. So that's the overall aim. And then we've got the three streams as reflected in the objectives, was my thought. It's not a massive point, but it just felt like we'd tucked away under a stakeholder section quite a key driver that sat at the top of the page, but up to the board.
Neil?
Thanks, Tom, and thanks to the task force or the group for putting this together. I think one of the things that I took away from reading it in its entirety, but it probably starts with the project objectives, was just trying to get down to, and it may come to some of the comments around the level of flexibility we have, but it was trying to get the focus right so that it's on supporting professional judgment and skepticism and obtaining sufficient appropriate evidence. And then my general reading was that it took me too much into some of the detail, focused on the types of procedures. And so I was looking to, and I've provided some comments on how I think I could achieve it, is to get the objectives to be at a slightly higher level, which may get us a little bit more flexibility, but then it avoids our actions going into the specifics that I think could create more fences and barriers. And so we go into the wording later that says clarify and define. And I think we're in a state of needing to have more flexibility rather than less. And the clarifications and definitions, if they're too granular, I think will build fences and barriers rather than create flexibility for practitioners to apply their professional judgment and skepticism. So that's my overall takeaway, is just raise up the project objectives a fraction, and I provided those edits, and then be cautious around being too granular and defining and clarifying later on.
Neil, for the sake of the discussion though, let's take one example of you elevating it so people sort of understand the gist of what you're getting at. So say, I don't know if you took 24A and you change that in any way, but take either 24A or 24B, and if you suggested a recommendation, then we'd get a sense of what you're after.
So 24A obviously breaks down into two components of 1 and 2. So the first piece would be to actually just switch the order around, and moving to 2 would be to, when designing and implementing procedures to obtain sufficient appropriate audit evidence. So that's the first piece, rather than designing and implementing overall responses or designing and performing further audit procedures in response to assessed risks or material misstatement. So it's just raising that piece up a little bit so that it's just focused on obtaining sufficient appropriate audit evidence. Would be an example of so it's 24A2.
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, and I think the other thing is like, if I saw your notes correctly, Neil is taking bullet B out, right? On the work to focus on the internal control as well. So I think there were some more.
Yeah, correct. So I mean, bullet B would come out. So it wouldn't be targeted specifically in the objective on the controls. I think there are other ways of necessarily achieving that objective without pinpointing it right up front. There are other ways to action it.
Anyone have, I guess I have a little worry about taking some of the detail out here, particularly because of some of the public interest comments we've gotten about what their expectations, what people's expectations are for this project. So I just want to focus on this. Anyone want to react to Neil's remarks? So
I had a similar sort of thought around, and particularly in B, where it was talking about internal controls, because we're sort of calling out one thing, but not necessarily others. So I did wonder whether it was, I was thinking particularly of substantive analytical procedures, but I have to say I was thinking of going down a slightly more granular route than taking it up a level. But at the moment, it feels like we're kind of halfway.
So I think the reason why we have this focus on internal controls is what we've heard from regulators and where they're really focusing on that. So I think, yes, we've heard comments about substantive analytical procedures as well, but like at least when doing the information gathering, the nature and extent of the comments on internal controls goes way beyond what we've heard on substantive analytical procedures. So that's why I think we should still, it's good to have that reference in there. And I don't think, for example, as soon as we are starting to add substantive analytical procedures, then we can add another few things as well in there. But I think the real focus here was on internal controls of what we've heard through the information gathering.
Josephine?
Yeah, thank you. Yes, I just want to respond to that point. I think that's absolutely spot on. We really do need to focus on internal controls, and I think it is critical that it's part of the objectives here. I thought the objectives, as you have them now, are now perfect. I think they're still broad enough that we can be flexible in how we respond to the objectives. And I think you'd actually got them just right. And I was going to say congratulations to the team for all the hard work getting us here. So we can't put my teeth back in. And also I was going to support Sue's challenge in regard to introducing requirements as well. Thank you, Sue. I was raising my hand initially on that point. I wouldn't want to see that specific action in the objectives. They're objectives. So they are what guide us, what lead us, and then the actions are really getting down to the granularity. But from my perspective, I really think it's important that we focus on internal controls, that we focus on this, encouraging the use of technology. I thought the objectives were spot on. Thank you.
James?
I'll just echo your comment. The level of interest in these specific areas is at the level at which our engagement with the PIOB and other stakeholders occur. So in the past, our project objectives used to be very, very high level. That did not help us relate our work to specific actions. Sorry. It made it difficult to translate our goals into our exposure drafts as we move forward. And then finally, it made it difficult to constrain scope. So I'm supportive of what Josephina said and what Tom has said. I think this gives us enough guidance at our project objectives levels to articulate to others, without further elaboration, our key touch points that we're going to be addressing.
Okay, anyone want to come back in? Wendy?
Sorry, just on this point, but I do have some other comments. First, I had to say, I forgot my thank yous before. This was.
Ado says we don't need to do them anymore.
I know, but I don't listen to Ado all the time. No, this is really a unique project. And so in my tenure, we have not done an integrated project like this. So to some degree, for me, it's a little overwhelming. You know, and I think I said this yesterday as it related to technology, but I have greater clarity on the technology now. To the objectives specifically, I also struggled with them, and I had to step back from them and say, okay, is this what this really means? And then do the issues and the actions follow? So I did have some wordsmithing on the objectives as well. I didn't send them in, but I know that Neil did, and I'm going to. I agree with Josephine. I don't think they're perfect, and we're never going to get perfection, but I feel like we need better balance on detail versus high level, and also balance. Sue brought up scalability earlier. So for example, when we say strengthening auditors' work, this is in 25, on internal controls, when appropriate. You know, we're not, it seems there's some there's some imbalance between the feedback that we've gotten and reach out that still needs to be done, which I think, Jasper, you mentioned that there's a research consulting group that's going to help do the research. I want to make sure it's aimed at non-PIEs. So those are my comments on the objectives.
I guess I get a little concerned about the last comment, though. Don't we overlay scalability on everything we do? So it can't by it itself be a project objective. Like, so I don't think we should be adding qualifiers as appropriate. The board does everything as appropriate. That is the outcome of our thing. And so there is sort of a Goldilocks approach we're trying to say, is that we need to be specific enough that we're accountable. People know what we're going to do. We're accountable, but not so specific that we're defining every action in the objectives of the standard. And so maybe having heard this conversation, it's like, I need to get a broad sense from this board, like, how comfortable are most people with the direction, recognizing we're getting input on language and the team's going to go back this week and bring back refinements with how it's stated today? Or are people really in the camp that Neil articulates, but somewhat Sue and Wendy have expressed some concern about, that wanted up another level? I could tell you, though, and maybe I should call out our PIOB representative Philippe here, like, when my discussions are with the PIOB on this, and whom we're ultimately going to have to answer to from an accountability standpoint, these are the types of things that we promise to deliver and they expect us to deliver on the project. And if we don't have it in the project proposal with some specificity, it's going to cause a challenge, because then we get into an issue about, I don't like what you did on 24A. of a particular standard. And I don't think that's where I want the discussion from an accountability standpoint. Philippe, I'm not putting you on the spot. If you want to come in, raise your hand. You don't have to, but it may be worthwhile getting a sense for the PIOB, what your expectations are when you look at project objectives.
Thank you, Tom. First, concerning this specific project, the PIOB, I think, has really appreciated the way public interest issues had been taken into account and integrated in the project, you know? So it's clear that at this stage of design of a project, you know, the objectives seem satisfactory with some comments that I will add later, but anyway, I think it's fully okay. So now, after that, you know, based on your discussion, for example, we appreciate the focus on internal control and the fact of, you know, being clear on, you know, that in the current times, it's no more appropriate to have fully substantive approach without any consideration for some, you know, internal control critical failures. So it's true that at the same time, we had the discussion and the connection with the project on the technology is particularly appropriate because, you know, the technology context puts, you know, this temptation, I would say, or inclination to imagine that with the new tools in audit, all the data can be checked, you know, and that you can abandon testing to have, for example, full review of the files supporting the financial statements and so on. And in this situation, you know, you can consider that, for example, internal control review is not really useful as long as you have the capacity, you know, on the financial statement to check all the data you contain in the files. So there is something which has to be, I think, clarified, redefined in terms, and which has big impacts on public interest and on the role of auditors in that matter. And, you know, the PIOB in this context is satisfied by the way, you know, some public interest issues and published have been taken into account. I don't know if it replies to your point, Tom, but at this stage, it's the comment that I can make.
Okay. So thank you, Philippe. That's very useful. One of the things I was thinking about, first of all, get a sense if people are broadly fine with the objectives in the way that they're stated in totality based upon what they've heard. Secondly, the point on scalability, one of the ways we could address it, because it's a factor that's going to be considered in the standard itself, maybe in the context of Section 4, it could be one of the bullet points under 26, like when we're speaking to people, it's one of the things that we're talking about is the scalability of the standard, and then that would capture some of the concerns. So, like, in order to address the public interest is contemplated by the people, the IAASB considers ABC. Maybe there's a D that says accounts for issues of scalability, and but I think there's a creative way for us to do that without inputting it directly into the project objectives, because I think we're always trying to make every standard that we do scalable. And if we write that into a project objective, that will be another thing. But we should not make it into a project objective for this proposal. Like, it seems to be, it's like something we're consulting on. Maybe it's something we ask stakeholders impacted by a project, but not part of our project objectives. I think it's more in that line. It would be more in section 4, something that it's something that reflects the public interest more generally. But if it's really important in this project to say something about scalability, then we could find another place to put it in the project proposal. Yeah.
If it's a point of emphasis, you'll see in the following section when we talk about the qualitative characteristics. And the qualitative characteristics is, in layman's term, what is the standard, what's the feel, form, shape, effect of the standard? One of the qualitative characteristics within the public interest framework is scalability. I see it repeated in every section of the detail in that area. You may wish just for a point of emphasis below the project objective, say amongst the qualitative characteristics that are important in this project as outlined is scalability for the above project objectives. You can emphasize that so it's not lost, but I just mentioned that is feeding through all of your proposed actions in the subsequent section.
So there's some, we could leave it to the drafting. If we want to have some nod to scalability, we could find a place here. But I really think we should not make it part of the project objectives. Okay, so let's get back to the major point here. There was a question about how we write our project objectives. Are people generally comfortable at the level at which the project objectives have been drafted? If you're not, let's maybe do this. If you're not comfortable, raise your hand. Yeah. Yes, Neil?
Can I just come in on a point on B, since I raised it initially, and I think what we're picking up is around a scalability point as well. So my initial piece was to say, yeah, do we really need B? Is that going to take us into too much bucketing? When I look at it now, we've got, from a scalability perspective, we're talking about promote consistent practice and auditor behaviors by facilitating effective responses to risk of material misstatement, including strengthening the auditor's work on internal controls. If what we're looking to do is to strengthen the work on internal controls, could we just take B and focus on the second part of it that just says facilitate and strengthen auditors' work on internal controls, so that we're not driving at this consistent behavior, consistent practices, which is taking away the professional judgment and perhaps then bucketing us into being more specific and eroding some of the scalability.
Anna?
No, thank you. And thank you, Neil, for the suggestion and the suggested sort of way of maybe addressing some of your concerns. I suppose the one aspect that I would highlight of the suggestion is that the objective to promote consistent practice and facilitate consistent practice and behaviours is really drawn out of the public interest framework, and having that as an overarching objective that supports high quality audits. Consistent practice, consistent behaviours is how we ensure that we get those outcomes. Consistent practice supports professional judgment in our perspective and the exercise of professional skepticism. And so only focusing on internal controls, well, removing those words would not quite align with what the actual practical substance of our objective. And the other angle you raise is maybe focusing on internal controls. And I think Sue raised a comment that, on the other hand, she was maybe concerned that we were focusing too much or too narrowly on internal controls when actually the practice issues were beyond just internal controls and so on. So there would also be that risk. Having said that, balancing the public interest of that focus on internal controls that a number of you have mentioned, including Philippe, that was why ultimately the decision was made to bring that out in the objective as including internal controls there. If that helps respond, I think about this.
Robert?
I like your comment. Sorry to say, I don't like the idea just to focus on internal controls in letter B. For me, it's too precise. We need to step back one further, and I like Philip's comments about internal control, whether using technology, and so there is a balance. So not just focusing on internal control. And maybe, Jasper, you mentioned that regulators would like to have us focusing more on internal control, and you wanted to have it in here as a, sorry to say, as a buzzword. Maybe we find a different place for it.
Okay, I feel like we need resolution here. Does someone feel an urgent need to comment here? Sue, do you want to come in?
It was just to clarify that broadly, I'm okay with the level of the objectives. I raised scalability because we had a suggestion that I felt was inappropriate from a scalability perspective. The comments I've got are more at the actions level rather than at the objectives.
Okay, but I do think there was actually a different point of view on objectives. We needed to get this because we will come back to the objectives at the end of the project and throughout the project to make sure that we're properly focused. I think in general, people feel comfortable with where we've landed. There's a need to account for some suggestions. You obviously get in some helpful drafting suggestions to the board. It's important to have enough specificity that we deal with a public interest concern. I suggest, and we will figure out the qualitative characteristic of scalability to highlight in an appropriate place in the project proposal, whether it's in section 4 or in another section. I leave it to the drafting of you. Are people comfortable with that? I know people are anxious actually to get into the substance of the issues themselves. So let's, Ada, is your TED card still up on this section? Okay, then feel free to come in.
So, yes, thank you, Tom. Yeah, I'm comfortable at the level of where the objectives are. I personally don't think we need to emphasize scalability. It's under every objective, and the qualitative standard setting objectives, it's mentioned there. So I don't think that's lost on the staff and the project team, or however we're going to call it going forward. I had one point on rereading this, and that's actually and given that it's audit evidence related, where I was part of with Sue, we say in under number 1, we say clarify whether the sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence is to be evaluated differently. And I know it rubbed me the wrong way previously, but I couldn't find the right words to express how, and my TA helped me materialize this. So the evaluate sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence is not a concept that we need to change. So we don't need to do that differently. I fully appreciate that that when technology is used, it may impact it, but I don't think that the fundamental concept is broken. So I've suggested some different wording to draw that out a little bit better, because this seems to suggest that the fundamental concept of evaluating sufficient appropriate audit evidence would be broken. Thank you.
Just to respond to Ado, that was not the intention. So we appreciate the suggested edits.
Okay. I think we've completed this question. Could we move on?
Yes. And I suppose just before moving to the next slide, I suppose that based on this, I think at this stage, we're landing on maybe not fundamental changes to the project objectives, just to make sure that your expectations are all managed. So if we can go to the next slide, sorry, Michelle. Thank you. So we now start to get into the substance, or not that this wasn't already substantive. So on scope, and at this point, if we would like to open on the introductory paragraphs, the actions in relation to objective A. Now, in this section, the main changes were not fundamental. And so except for the splitting out of the section on substantive analytical procedures from what previously was issue 3 into its own standalone issue. I'd say that's the biggest visual change, and the others were a number of clarifying edits. But I'll leave that if you have all your comments on these sections. Thank you.
So all the topics under our objective A. I have a question. I just want a clarification on the use of the word clarify. When we talk about clarify, it seems to be about defining better or revising, but do we also mean how to apply a concept in the particular context? Like, to me, that's often what we're talking about here, particularly. It's not that the actual fundamental issue needs to be addressed or changed, but it's about elucidating how it would be applied in a particular context. So if that's what we mean by clarify, I think I'm much more comfortable with it, but I don't necessarily think that the fundamental concept always needs to be changed. Is that, I just.
Yes. And yeah, ultimately that is what we mean. Clarify ultimately is used when the challenges appear to be because there's misunderstandings and so on. So any way that we can find to clarify that, which will likely be the ways that you've described, is ultimately what we're intending.
Yeah, I'm happy with that then. Eric?
Oh, sorry.
Thanks, and compliments to the team for getting to where we are today, and a very challenging project and effort to put the proposal together. On this particular section, one of the things I was really struggling with was really understanding the implications of the asterisk and where we've identified throughout the proposal an asterisk and what that actually means when it comes to the project. I know there's a bit at the end where it talks about at some stage the board might reevaluate whether some of the material is ready to be or needs to be exposed or re-exposed or not, but up front, it doesn't really tell me how you're going to deal with these elements. Just as an example, in item number 1, it's got ISA 500 asterisk, clarify the definitions of appropriateness and sufficiency. And that's what the Audit Evidence Task Force did. So is that now finished? Is that done? Or are we going to go back and reassess that work? It just isn't clear to me. And so I struggled with, as I read through this whole thing, how that was going to work. So that was kind of an overarching comment. Do you want me to work through the different bits? Okay. In number 3, on the right-hand side there, under ISA 500, it says develop examples within application material to enable auditors to consistently evaluate the relevance and reliability of different sources of information. And I don't think examples on their own will actually enable auditors to consistently evaluate information. It may illustrate how you might do it, or it might be helpful in doing that evaluation, but examples themselves will not achieve that on their own. So I'm not sure whether the objective is to, or whether that particular point is designed to focus on enabling auditors to consistently evaluate, or is it just to provide some examples of what they could do to evaluate? So it's just clear to me. And then in 3, on the left-hand side, the last bullet talks about concerns about the appropriateness of professional skepticism exercised when evaluating and concluding on the sufficiency and appropriateness of audit evidence. And I didn't really see any actions on the right-hand side that were addressing that particular point, so I wasn't sure whether, well, what to do about that. In number 4, there's a number of actions on the right-hand side, but the purpose of this was to look at the stand back, and I didn't really see how these actions, particularly the ones in ISA 500, were going to help you with the stand back. So it wasn't clear. I think we need to be clear somehow how these actions are addressing the issue. I think that was it for the time being. Thanks.
Billy, and then Josephine.
So Tom, I just wanted to come back to your comment about clarify, and then maybe also Eric's comment about the asterisks that we use. I think somewhere in the table, yeah, so footnote 10 is a little bit further on in the table where we explain what we mean by explore. We can probably just explain also what we mean by clarify. And I think Tom, you're right. You know, in certain instances, it does mean explain better, describe better. But I think in other instances, it actually also means looking at the application of the requirement. Having said that, I just wanted to make sure that we all, again, still understand that, remember, at the very high level, our requirements tell you what to do. Our application material tells you why you need to do that. And yes, it ventures into a little bit of the how, but not a lot of the how, because we're not writing a methodology. And so we need to keep that balance as well. So when we say it's about how to apply, just remember the how doesn't really mean we're going to tell you in detail, step by step, how to do this. It's going to be principle based. It's going to be the what in the requirement, the why in the application material. And then maybe to Eric's point about the examples sometimes illustrate a little bit of the how you can do that. And similarly, Eric, with your asterisks, I think we can maybe also point people, because I thought we did it in paragraph, sorry, I have it here, 32 to 34. That's where we try to explain that the work that was already done in the ED 500 project, and under what circumstances that may be revisited. But maybe we can just flag that a little bit better.
Okay. Josephine?
Thank you. Yeah, I just want to say thank you to the team. I'm happy with this particular objective A. I just have one suggestion, which is maybe similar to what Eric was articulating in terms of, and I only really noticed it once you changed it, but where it says develop examples within application material to enable auditors to consistently evaluate the relevance. I think that's just a step too far for us, given the number of different circumstances and different audit engagements across the globe. I think just maybe tone it down and just talk about developing examples to help auditors evaluate relevance and reliability of different sources of information, because you would have to have so many examples to actually achieve what you've written there. So just tone it down a little bit. That's my suggestion. But otherwise, I'm happy. Thank you.
Stella?
Thank you, Tom. I have one comment on issue 1 and 2. It's about the difference between the original and the copy of an automated document. I know that how an entity uses technology affects how an auditor evaluates the reliability and authenticity of audit evidence. For example, the way the auditor assesses audit evidence can be affected by whether it's in paper or electronic format. And it can be challenging to tell the difference between the original and the copy of an automatic document. So it looks like this issue is missing from the project proposal in issue 1 or 2. Thank you.
Okay. Sue?
Thanks. I had a comment on issue 3. Where we've now split out the 520 piece, which I think is entirely appropriate, is what we talked about last time. But I think in doing that, we've perhaps lost a little something around the skepticism piece in performing analytical procedures. The new piece 11 is a bit more granular. But by previously having it linked to the overarching goals on skepticism, I think was helpful. So whether you reintroduce a thought around skepticism in this section or bring something in about it in analytical procedures, I think would be helpful, because it is one of those points that keeps coming through the inspection reports and things.
Okay, so people have been pretty supportive so far of the section, but with some suggestions, Wendy?
So I had the same 3 comments that Eric had, which was about clarify, which I think we're intending to clarify, so I should be good there. The asterisk, I think, Billy, you are 100% right. It is in 34 to 36, but I didn't get to 34 and 36 until afterwards. So I was, kind of each time I saw the asterisk, it was not very clear to me which was asterisk, which was not. And maybe we need to move that up earlier in the document. And I also had the same comment on the standbacks.
Okay. Anyone else? So, Anna, I'm going to turn it back to you. I know the theme has already thought about how to respond to some of these comments.
The theme was going to be, actually, thank you for those of you who had provided those comments. So Eric and Josephine reiterating it, the comment on the examples to enable, we sort of have taken that on to find a better way of articulating that. I would like to ask a clarifying question of Sue, but maybe it can wait until we get to the later objective, where the issue on substantive analytical procedures does come up around the specific areas that have been lost. So I don't know, I can come back to that later. But otherwise, no, I think, thank you, we have mostly echoed those changes.
I'm happy to provide some suggestions offline or something. I don't think it's a major thing. I just think it was, when it was front of mind and it was talking about skepticism, that was what was so important. And I think by sort of moving it, it's just lost that emphasis.
Philippe?
Thank you, Tom. Some general comments referring to, the question of the different sources of information. I think that the public interest is more and more concerned, by the availability of a lot of data. The way now that audits are performed and conducted, I would say, to simplify, is less internal digging within the company and more open to external sources of data. I think that to some extent, not considering, what external data provide information when it exists, it's something which could be considered as negligence. It's not about internal reconciliation of sources of data and so on. It's the fact of, having this broad view of external data which impact, the company, the activity, the reputation, and all these things, And sometimes you realize that you have a lot of available data. Maybe some providers you have to pay to have access, but there are external data relating to company. So these data, external, have an impact on the sensitivity of the public interest and stakeholders, because they can get this data, And so I think that the audit activity will be more and more horizontal compared to a sort of, vertical audit digging within the information of a company. And to this extent is probably just a way to write some provisions within the ISAB, probably 500, 520. But I think this aspect of considering, and having specific sensitivity and approach to external information in the context of, the professional skepticism and challenging, the management and making comparison, for example, for analytical procedures, not only internal data, but with some external data is more and more important and linked to technological aspects, providing information. So I don't know if you have considered that and if it's, included in the spirit of the project, but it's an aspect of public interest that I wanted to, stress now, because it's something which is critical for the evolution of the credibility of the audit. Thank you.
Thanks, Philippe. Personally, when I read this section, I assume the internal and external information sources were included, particularly when I look at point number 2. But there may be other elements in it. And also, I have the knowledge of what was the original ISA 500 exposure draft, where we are in that, where we explicitly included as well. I don't think we made the distinction of sources of information in the project proposal, but it's certainly on our mind in terms of the project itself. We're just not specified our conclusion yet and what the treatments should be because of the source of information. Is that correct?
Yes, thank you, Tom. That does remind me the point, Philippe, that you make, Christelle. I realize I had wanted to, touch on your specific point that it seemed that ultimately what you're touching on is very similar or at least related, and it really speaks to the variety of sources of information that the auditor is looking at. And so an easier way of actually capturing that idea might just be as simple as that word is something we were thinking, because to Tom's point, in terms of external versus internal sources of information, that is all captured broadly within our intention in issues 1 and 2. So thank you.
Okay, if it would be helpful to make some sort of nod to that, well, I think you could think about it this week in drafting. Okay, any other comments on this section? I think Christelle, this is a stray card that you still name 10 you have up. Okay, Hankin, did you want to come in on this section, or if not, can we move forward?
A clarifying point on the matter that was raised by Eric and Wendy on issue number 4 on standard requirements. They have made a point that certain of the proposed actions are not directly responsive to this issue. So there's a reason why it's in there, because the explanation of the relationship between 500 and 330 has a linkage to where the standback requirement should actually sit. So that's the reason that it was there. And same with the second point on the relocation and some of the requirements. But if other board members strongly feel it needs to be removed, I'd like to hear their feedback. But I gather that majority of the board members are comfortable with retaining these proposed actions because some of this material already sits in the holding package. I'll give you a few seconds. I'll take silence as support.
Yeah, I think.
Okay.
Let's move forward.
Thank you. So yeah, ultimately, if we just keep going, in order for objective B, for the auditor's work on internal control, this was one of the areas where we had really focused on thinking more, revisiting our language in the actions to really emphasize that we weren't trying to stray into developing methodology, which we had heard quite clearly as a concern in the previous board meeting. And so that's the basis of many of the changes in here. We did receive a number of offline comments on this area as well, including requests to sort of clarify some of the issue descriptions potentially, which we're considering at the moment already. So thank you for drafting suggestions and those nudges.
Okay. Yes. Objective B, issues 5 through 8. Sachika.
Thank you. I have a comment on number 7. When I reread the issue and the action, the wording of the issue seems to imply that issue is about inconsistency in the practice. And on the other hand, the proposed action seems to purely address the issue of inconsistency between the standards and the necessity of updating 330 based on 315 revised in 2019. And so in other words, it seems the link is missing between the issues and the proposed action. And I know it's just a nuance, but I think we can a little bit soften the first part that talks about, the 315 in the action. So I already sent you the offline suggestions. Maybe you can take a look at that. That's my comment. Thank you.
Sue?
So my comment was on issue number 5 and the second part of that, which is it was previously talking about encouraging the use of tests of controls. And I think there are two elements here. One is the discussion we've had about when tests of controls are really necessary to achieve the audit outcome. I think that's the clarification that's been included here. But in doing that clarification, I think it's also then potentially excluded or downplayed the broader piece, which was about encouraging auditors where tests of controls might be a more effective route or something like that. So it was more linking to the audit quality piece rather than the well, I suppose the other is audit quality as well, but it's a different level. Thanks.
So where it's not maybe needed, you wanted an encouragement as well. Okay, point taken. Anyone else? Josephine?
Yeah, thank you. So my comment is on 5 and the second paragraph, and maybe I missed this along the way, sorry, but I feel like notwithstanding that thinking about yesterday, we were talking about ultimately there may be requirements along the way in terms of tests of controls, and I appreciate that. But in terms of judgment as to the factors to consider if tests of controls are appropriate in the circumstances, I don't think we can really go down our requirements route there. I think that's more about application of a requirement in terms of further audit procedures. So in this particular change, I would rather we talk about explore enhancements, to the standards, which means that you can look at both requirements and application material and not tie ourselves down to absolutely having to be requirements here. And I think you'll still have the same outcome, because you'll still, I suppose it's to Bill's point earlier, you're not then saying we absolutely have to do this. We may find that application material is better. We may find that actually requirements are better. So apologies if I missed that last time we talked about this paragraph at the board meeting, but I'd rather we just expand it, pull back a little bit from that and just give ourselves a bit of flexibility. Thank you.
Did you have something else going on at the last board meeting?
No, I'm always concentrating 1000%. I just clearly missed that.
Yeah. 5,500, it's all the same. Okay. So you got some feedback here, some suggestions on wording. I think general support for the direction you're taking on this section. Should we move to the next objective?
So we're now on items 9 to 12. the major change really here is the reallocation of the proposed actions and issues relating to substantive analytical procedures. Other than that, Tom, I throw it back to you for comments from the board.
This is action 9 through 12, up to objective C. So we're still within objective B, but
Yeah.
the second half of this. Christelle?
Thank you. It's on issue 11. Issue 11, it's the last sentence. Regarding the last sentence and the last proposed action, I would suggest making an edit to clarify the relevance of the data used in addition to reliability. So if we take the sentence is clarify the requirement and application material as appropriate relating to evaluating the reliability and relevance of data, etc. Thank you.
You're getting nods from the team, so I'm sure that's not a problem. Sue?
It was an observation about the change that's been made in issue 12 and then later on, because previously you'd had ISA 500 and 330 as the kind of subheads, and that's now been changed to relevant standards as applicable. And I'm sort of conscious of what Billy said earlier about scope creep in this project, and I just wondered whether that is potentially introducing an element of scope creep there outside of what the original goal was. So I think, you know, as my understanding, the scope of this project is primarily on those standards. Anything else, there might be conforming or consequential amendments, but that's probably different to what we're talking about.
If I may respond to that, Sue. So the main reason why we changed it is we do agree that the focus of the project proposal is on the 3 standards, but then recognizing that some of the fundamental changes that we're making into these standards, the documentation elements of it may not necessarily would fit in 500, 330 or 520 and may necessarily be in 230. So that's just to offer some flexibility.
Josephine?
Yeah, just to prove I am listening intently, the change that was just suggested to evaluating the reliability of data, that is the actual requirement in 520. So if we're trying to say we want to make a change to that requirement and make it focus on relevance and reliability, that's a different point. But how it's written here is correct in accordance with ISA 520 as far as I remember. So just before you go away and change it, and then I come back and say, change it back.
But Josephine, maybe some of the application material can also speak to relevance. So I think we do appreciate that the requirement is focused on reliability.
Yeah.
But I think.
Okay. Bill?
Back to the point that Sue raised and you responded, Hankin. There's a number of, in this particular objective, there's a number of times that the specific standards have been replaced by the terms relevant standards. And back to scope creep, it just concerns me that, I just don't think this board is capable of making a change to a standard of a minor nature. In other words, we've agreed there are some standards which will need a complete rewrite, and I just don't know how we can impact relevant standards in a much lesser way. I just don't think that we're equipped to do that. So,
in response to that, Bill, I think it's also about flexibility within which standards within this in-scope standards are we going to touch when responding to specific proposed actions.
Let me give you an example. If something is relevant to audit sampling, how do we include that in our standards without doing a complete rewrite of the audit sampling standard?
Okay. The big boss comes in.
Well, yeah. Well, the bottom line is you've got a project proposal that focuses you on particular standards. So in this case, it's 500, 330 and 520. In doing those standards, we recognize that we have a broader body of standards that this needs to fit into, and that's why we've got the facility of doing conforming and consequential amendments. Conforming amendments are very straightforward. Those are sort of obvious. References need to change, terms need to be updated, those type of things. But then you also have consequential amendments. Consequential amendments are more significant in nature, and they are needed, as the word suggests, that as a consequence of something we did in 330 or 520 or 500, we need to change something in our, and I'm going to upset Josephine now, we need to change something in 220 so that it can continue to work. It can continue to work effectively together in a coherent manner. However, having said that, the consequential amendments are also meant to be what is absolutely needed. It needs to be discrete. It needs to be very specific. So we've had instances of that in the past. When we did the ISA 540 project, we had to do a consequential amendment to ISA 500 to bring in the term of external information sources. So that was a consequential amendment. As soon as you move beyond that, then you would either need to change the scope of the project you're busy with, as we discussed this morning, or you'd go into a new project. And that new project can either be a narrow scope project, which we can complete on a quicker timeline, or it needs to be a comprehensive project. So that's basically the tools we have in our toolbox.
So I think what people are uncomfortable with is, without that context, relevant standards as applicable seems to open a potential Pandora's box. What we're talking about here are changes to 500, 330, 520, and any relevant conforming and consequential amendments. And so however we clarify it, seems to be, let's make sure that that's what we all mean here. I'm fine with saying bucket in 500, 330, 520 as a broad thing, because we don't know which standard, we don't want to specify action in a specific standard maybe in this section, but we're not going beyond conforming and consequentials to other standards here. We're going to talk about modernization of the 500 series. Maybe we will gather ideas for that through this project too, but I think we just need to be very clear that that's what we mean when we talk about relevant standards. Okay. Eric, and then on.
Thanks, Tom. So again, yeah, I'll just work through my offline comments here. And this will probably come out a lot more when we get into the technology section. But I noted in the appendix to the issues paper a reference that item 9, issue 9, was going to address responding to risks. And I didn't see anything in here that would sort of help with responding to risk, which is part of this this project. So I just not sure if that needs to be rethought. In 10, I wasn't really clear what this was driving at. It says this may include alternative proposals to achieve the public interest objective of this requirement. And if determined that 18 remains appropriate, then clarify it. It just seemed to me the actions needed, we need to sort of get what are the real steps we're going to take here. It seems to me it could be clear if we sort of said we need to understand the intent and rationale for 18 and then consider whether it remains appropriate. And if not, then what do we do next? What are the other proposals? I just found the way it was worded was not clear how we would actually tackle that concern. The in 11, it's there's no asterisk, but it's talking about clarifying the requirement and application material is appropriate relating to evaluating the reliability of data from which the auditor's expectation is developed. And I thought there's stuff in 500 already that sort of deals with when you're using information as audit evidence that you need to evaluate the relevance and reliability. So there seems to be some connection to 500 there that is missing. There's a relationship between these two standards, and that maybe needs to be thought through. I had the same comment about the relevant standards, what that means, particularly in 12, where we've got relevant standards and then an asterisk, develop application material. So it just was a bit confusing. And in 12, under the IS, and the bit that used to be ISA 330, it says develop requirements or application material that clarify. I just worried that this was sort of a bit that we need to figure out whether we need requirements, not necessarily develop them as a focus. So it was, I think, just concerned about the wording there. And those are my comments. Thanks.
Thank you. Hernan?
Thank you, Tom. My point is on the point 9, clarify how the requirements of ISA 330 reflect or are linked to the work effort performed, blah, 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 under ISA 315 and alignment of the terms. My concern is the direction of the alignment, because yesterday we heard that the concepts and the terms in the ISA 515 maybe could need a revision under the work done by the technology team. And I believe that we maybe just clarify the direction or the need to work together with both teams to be sure that we are not changing the terms to be aligned to the terminology in the ISA 315 if we are sure that in the future we are going to move the terminology in this standard, because it is a point of stability into the standards. Thank you.
Okay. Any reaction to the team?
I had actually I was wondering if Eric, you raised a concern on issue 10 and the language of the action there, and it is a action point that we sort of played around with a lot, and we went back and forth on how to best sort of articulate the ordering and so on. And I just wanted to seek other board members' views as well on that issue, because we discussed a number of options of how to articulate what we're doing, which fundamentally what we're saying is we need to make sure that we're being very clear about the purpose of the requirement, and just that it's very clear, and effectively find a way of making it clear. And if the challenges in practice with applying it exist currently, suggest that we need to change something, we need that flexibility to find another way of getting to what we're trying to achieve with that requirement. And so we want to be able to explore that. So I just wanted to seek views there first.
Were you coming in on that?
Yes, thank you. And I was thinking of raising my card in response to Eric's comment on item 10. This is deliberately an explore. And I think we need to be not constrain ourselves too much in dealing with this requirement that is difficult, and for which there's also misalignment with other auditing standards that don't have such a requirement, particularly in light of risk assessment procedures that are more precise. So this is where I would even suggest that we just keep the first sentence and leave everything out. It just gives us the flexibility to explore it properly. Thank you.
Josephine?
Yeah. I would agree that I think explore a way forward is helpful. And I think that might include alternative proposals to achieve the public interest objective of this requirement. I'm genuinely not convinced that this requirement is covered at all in any way by the precision of 315, where 315 has a different purpose. And so I'm not convinced necessarily we can just completely, for example, dismiss 330, but clarifying it, explaining better why it's there, and maybe going through that process of exploring that, then we might come up with an alternative, a better way of thinking about it, and maybe being more precise about what we actually mean by it. So I think it's fine as it is, personally. Thank you.
Okay. I think you're getting support for the way it is. I think it's broadly flexible enough with Explore. Okay, we're gonna run out of time quick. We have 5 minutes. I just want to let people know if we don't finish this, we think we have gaps, a potential gap in the schedule later today, but we're gonna finish this on time, or close. We could go 5 minutes and have a 15-minute break. But we have people coming in at 10:50, so we will need to switch to the next topic and then maybe revert to this again at the end of experts. Okay, is that fine with everyone? Okay, let's start the next topic, but we're not going to preempt it before everyone's had a chance to opine.
Okay, I'll step on the gas pedal. So the changes on technology really is reflective of some of the feedback that we've received from the board, which is really focused on aligning the proposed actions and issues that we describe here with the outcome of the results of the gap analysis. And we're hoping that we have achieved that. So Tom, I bring it back to you for comments.
Okay. Christelle?
My comment is on issue 14. I acknowledge the challenge of aligning ATT procedures with the nature of audit procedures as outlined in the ISA, consistent with issue 6 small c in the gap analysis. But it looks like the proposed actions aren't enough to fully address this concern. So I think that perhaps we should add another action to explore whether the type of procedures should be revised. Thank you.
Tom, let me quickly respond to that. Christelle, that point actually is more of it embedded within the first bullet point, which is to use the ATT, clarify the use of ATT within the construct of risk assessment procedures and further out procedures. So that's giving some recognition of the fact that there's some gray area when you're using risk assessment procedures and when using technology to perform risk assessment procedures and further out procedures. That's basically.
Yes, thank you. In fact, my stakeholders in France challenged that technology-enabled procedures might not fall into the types of procedure described in Extend ISA 500, application material, inspections, observation, etc. So they said that there may be a need for a new type of procedures.
Then open it up for the board, Tom, because our understanding of the use of technology is it is a tool. It's not a different type of procedure altogether. So I want to get the feedback from the board in general, whether you have the same views as to whether that warrants a specific proposed actions to explore whether using technology creates a different type of procedure under our current construct.
I thought the language was about explorers open enough to consider that possibility. So I guess to me, we're sort of a little bit fighting over semantics here. I think we could address the point Christelle's saying is like in the context of exploration, maybe this is an outcome you would agree with, maybe you won't. But I guess I don't want to invite a huge debate at the board table right now at this point in the project, but I think it is a consideration. Okay, Sue?
My point is on item 13, and it's the first paragraph that's been added. In the middle there, we talk about developing a definition of ATT or whatever the alternative term is. We have already had feedback and discussions around the board as part of the 500 process. And so while I agree that we need to sort of use consistent words and everything, we went down the route of a description, and that's what the board has discussed and agreed with previously. So I'm not suggesting that it may not be appropriate to revisit that, but the very definitive words in that project proposal, I would prefer. I mean, we could take it out or at least get back into the consideration kind of language. Thanks.
I think, Sue, so your comment actually is echoed by Ado. So there's some new changes in the editing such that basically the consideration covers all of the aspects within that proposed action.
Okay, Satrika?
Thank you. My comment is relating to number 16, and I think it's about the last part of the proposed action, and the last part of the proposed action was changed, and now it became, I think, 2 bullets. And during my outreach before the meeting, I got some views that now it is a bit difficult to understand the necessity of having these 2 bullets and the meaning whether at the beginning of each bullet. And the asterisk was also added to the bullets, and therefore I searched the paragraph that talk about exception in 500 holding package, and I found the paragraph that directly links to the second bullet, but I could not find the paragraph that in the holding package that directly linked to the first bullet. So I just thought I wonder whether it will be need to have the first bullet, or if needed, we need some clarification about the distinction that will, I think, help people to read that bullet. That's my comment.
We're open to deleting that first bullet. Actually, I don't think so that's necessary.
Okay. Eric?
Yeah, just as a general comment, I really struggled with this part of the project proposal because I was working with 3 different documents. I was working with the gap analysis, I was working with the appendix and the issues paper, and I was looking at this document, and I was trying to see whether they actually talk to each other and whether what's in one end actually fits with what's in the other end. And I've made a number of comments offline about where something was said in the gap analysis, well, this is being addressed in the risk response paper, issue number X. And when I look at issue number X in the project proposal, it doesn't really seem to be doing what it's said to be doing. So I would just encourage you to go, I've given some specific comments, but I would encourage you to actually go and do that work at some point or do it again, just to make sure that we really are addressing those technology issues appropriately in this proposal, because there seem to be some gaps to me there.
A reflection on sort of reconciling, Wendy?
A quick comment on 17. If the staff could take a look at whether or not there needs to be something in there for 315, because it seems like we're going right to the response, but I'm not sure 315 is going to, I think it's identifying the risk first and then the response.
Okay, Hankin, maybe you could respond and then we could break.
Yes, Eric, appreciate the comments on the areas for improvement on the reconciliation between the gap analysis and the proposed actions in the project proposal. We'll look closer into that. On the comment by Wendy, we would also look into that. And
Okay, let's take a break right now. I think we got through the issues, but there's more to come. We probably don't have that much more to come, but we'll probably need a little bit more time on this. We'll break now. We'll reconvene in 15 minutes, 10 minutes to the hour. We'll switch to experts. We'll ask the project team on this to be ready to move to the table as soon as that section's over, so we don't lose Tom. And I appreciate all the comments and input so far. I thank you to the project team. Great job so far. Complex stuff. So thank you. And we go to break. Could everyone start returning to their seats, please? Okay, we're back. Welcome, Ken. I think Cam is gonna join us shortly, so should we wait a moment? Online, you just, Cam, if you want to put on your video, greetings from the other side of the world. Okay, well, Cam also is joining us. So the purpose today is to scope our narrow scope amendments project on experts. Remember, this is derived a little bit from what IAASB has done. Hi, Cam. Good to see you. So the purpose of having Ken and Cam here is not to have a deliberation on what IAASB has done, but to understand what they've done more and have an opportunity to get some clarifications from them and ask questions and help to inform our discussion afterwards, which Dan will take the lead on. So it's great to have Ken and Cam here. First of all, I think we all want to congratulate IAASB for completing their standards last week. So great job to you. I think we're really proud of the fact that we have an integrated package for sustainability out there right now. And so congratulations to you and the team on that as well. Ken, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much, Tom, and thank you all for having myself and Cam be here to speak about IAASB's Experts Project and importantly, the standard our board approved last Friday. As you all know, this standard was an integral part of the sustainability-related standards, the package that our board committed to developing and finalizing by the end of this year. So we achieved that last Friday. So this morning, it's going to be Cam and myself walking you through essentially a bit of the journey we traveled on this project, and also providing with a bit of an outline of the project as it was finalized last week. So Michelle, if you could maybe flip to the first slide. So just a bit of an agenda here. So I'll speak to the first part of the presentation, and then Cam will take the second half with the walkthrough for the standard. I'll start with the background and speak a bit about the project objectives, then the journey that we embarked on, and then I'll speak a bit about the ethical framework that we put together. And I'll touch on the interoperability of the expert standards with IAASB standards and the work we've done working closely with the IAASB team. And then I'll pass it over to Cam to walk through a bit of the outline of the standard using section 390 as a bit of an illustration. Michelle, next slide, please. So first of all, in terms of the background, as you know, the use of the work of an external expert is nothing new, certainly not to this board, because you already have ISO 620, and you have also covered using the work of an external expert in ISA 5000. Experts have been around, and they have been used in audits and of assurance engagements for a long time. In fields that we know about that are outside the expertise of professional accountants, auditors, but also there are new areas that are emerging, as you know, particularly in the area of sustainability reporting and assurance. And we know that experts are being used and will be used in a number of areas in relation to sustainability, whether it's climate reporting, biodiversity, social issues, etc. That said, we had a number of questions raised in a number of projects that we undertook at IAASB over the recent years. In particular, in our project on engagement in group audits, that was a project that developed independence standards for group audits. We also had questions on our technology project as well as our tax planning project. In addition, there were questions that were raised by PIOB and a number of stakeholders, really when they considered that experts are being used in the context of audit engagements, for example, yet they were not subject to any sort of ethical requirements or independence requirements, even though they are essentially contributing to the audit or assurance report. And our board also recognized that there was a need to address circumstances where experts are being used, their work is being used in other circumstances of a context, for example, by professional accountants in public practice, carrying out non-assurance services, non-accountants themselves who might be carrying out sustainability assurance engagements in accordance with our IASA, International Ethics Standards for Sustainability Assurance, and also in the context of professional accountants in business who might be using external experts in order to carry out their professional activities. So that's a bit of the background and how we've been sort of coming along in taking on this project. Michelle, next slide, please. So in terms of the project objectives, essentially there were twofold. We were focused on developing a consistent global ethical baseline that would apply to professional accountants in public practice, sustainability assurance practitioners, and professional accountants in business when they use the work of an external expert. Our board also was focused on addressing heightened stakeholder expectations in relation to ethics / independence of external experts when these individuals are used in audit and assurance engagements. So really, these were the two-pronged sort of focus we took as part of our project. Michelle, next slide, please. So just a quick note about the journey we traveled. Really, this project was started and completed in, I would say, in an accelerated timeframe within 2 years. The project was approved in December 2022 alongside the sustainability project. We issued an exposure draft a year later, and during the course of this year, we worked through the responses to the exposure draft. We engaged with stakeholders through an extensive program of outreach. We had close coordination with the IAASB, with the audit team, Vili, Dan, and others on your team. And just last week, as we indicated, our board finalized the standards relating to using the work of an expert. There are essentially three sections that form part of that package. Section 390, which deals with professional accountants in public practice, whether it's in the context for audits or of assurance engagements or non-assurance services that accountants in public practice might provide. Our second section is section 5390, which applies in the context of sustainability assurance engagements. And that section is part of our ESA. And our third section is section 290, which applies to professional accountants in business. Michelle, next slide, please. So I spoke a bit about the ethical framework. So this is really what it is in a nutshell. In terms of an outline, it is a framework that applies to both reporting and assurance contexts. We have started first in defining really what we're speaking about, the concept of an expert and the concept of expertise. And Cam will speak a bit about this in a bit more detail later on. It was important as we developed those standards to distinguish between the work of experts and the work of other individuals, organizations that might be providing information to professional accountants or sustainability assurance practitioners. We then go on to look at the issue of evaluating whether to use the work of an external expert or an expert. Our board really zoomed in on external experts as opposed to experts broadly speaking, because, and I'll speak to that, we cover internal experts in an audit or assurance context through the independence requirements. And in terms of using the work of an internal expert in a PIB context or outside of audit or assurance, really that is considered to be information that's coming from management. We also very consciously did not deal with independence for external experts, because our board was very clear that when it comes to external experts, they are not in the business of assurance, audit or assurance. They are not generally professional accountants. And therefore, we really had to approach using the work of an expert through the lens of ethics and ethical provisions. We also considered the context of external experts being used in an audit or of assurance context. And there our framework builds in additional objectivity considerations in relation to the evaluation of the external experts' objectivity in that particular context. Then we close off the circle, so to speak, through provisions that deal with concluding on the external experts' competence, capabilities, and objectivity. And there is a second part of that framework that deals with the potential threats to the professional accountants' compliance with the fundamental principles when using the work of an external expert. So that also is part of the framework that has now been finalized. Michelle, next slide, please. So I'd just like to speak a little bit about interoperability with IAASB standards. As indicated, we've worked very closely with the IAASB team as we went on through this journey. There were questions as to whether there was too much of an overlap between the provisions we were developing in our sections for the code and the provisions or the material that already is in ISO 620, and also the provisions that are now in the ISO 5000. We were very clear that our project dealt very specifically with ethical issues and ethical threats to professional accountants' compliance with the fundamental principles. So the purpose is very different from the purpose or purposes under IAASB standards, which are essentially to address whether the work of external experts is adequate for the auditors or professional accountants' purposes. The scope is also different. We have a broader scope under the code, so we don't just deal with audits and assurance engagements. We also cover non-assurance services. We cover, of course, sustainable assurance engagements, and also we cover professional accountants in business, in contrast to the current standards in the suite of IAASB standards, ISA 620, ISA 5000, and ISA 500 in relation to management experts. And then I touched on a little bit about our focus on external experts and not so much internal experts. So, Michelle, next slide, please. So in our coordination with Vilidan and others on our IAASB team, we really came to the final landing on in our standards in terms of really how to build the appropriate bridges or hooks between our two sets of standards, at least insofar as ISA 5000 is concerned. So in our section 390, for example, we have two specific application material paragraphs. Firstly, one application material paragraph that explains that other professional standards might address the competence, capabilities, and objectivity of an external expert as factors that significantly affect whether the work of the external expert will be adequate for the professional accountant's purpose. And then we have second application material paragraph that, if you will, sort of sets out the what the standard under the code will not do. And that is that the code will not address the professional accountant's evaluation of the adequacy of the external expert's work for the accountant's purposes. The code will also not address implications for the engagement if the professional accountant determines that such work is not adequate for the accountant's purposes. And the section also makes a clear statement that other professional standards might address these implications. And in ISA 5000 as well, through our coordination, we've landed on a reference, a hook, if you will, in ISA 5000 that really explains that ethical standards or relevant ethical requirements might prohibit using the work of an external expert if such expert does not have necessary CCO competence, capabilities, and objectivity. So through these bridges or hooks, we have sort of tied the two sets of standards, as I say, in particular, ISA 5000, very closely together so that there's full interoperability. Michelle, next slide, please. So we're coming through to the walk through the standards, and I'll turn it over to Cam to walk through the outline of the ethical framework in a bit more detail. Next slide, Michelle. But before I pass it to Cam, I just want to speak a bit about the ethical underpinning of the standard in the code, in particular section 390, which deals with audit and of assurance engagements, or covers those types of engagements. Really what the code is coming from when it comes to using the work of an expert is to address the concept of threats to the professional accountant's compliance with the fundamental principles that might be created if the professional accountants themselves do not have sufficient expertise to perform the professional service. And what the code then tees up or lines up is that in that case, in such circumstances, the professional accountant might apply a safeguard to address such threats. And one such safeguard is to use the work of an external expert. So there is therefore a sort of a path through the ethical lens to address using the work of an external expert in the code. And if the professional accountant uses the work of an external expert who doesn't have the necessary CCO, in such a case, threats to the accountant's compliance with the fundamental principles are created that cannot be eliminated or reduced to an acceptable level. And in such circumstances, the professional accountant can go ahead and use the work of the external expert. So that's a bit of the ethical underpinning for those provisions in the code. So let me pass it over to Cam now to kind of walk us through the main sort of elements of the ethical framework, and then more than happy to take any questions that you might have. Cam,
Thank you.
over to you.
Thank you. And on the next slide, please, Michelle. So this goes through the first element of the framework that a couple slides back where it showed the 5 layers. The first element is the is new definitions and revised definitions that were incorporated into the code. And as Ken mentioned, this really is to delineate the work of specifically the expert from the work of any other person. And it could be, for example, Bloomberg or other data providers. So firstly, the definitions that were introduced, new definitions, that it's expertise, and this is fully coordinated and aligned with the IAASB's definition of expertise. So that's skills, knowledge, and experience in a particular field. The second new definition is expert, and that leverages on the first definition of expertise. So it's an individual possessing expertise outside the professional accountant's or sustainability assurance practitioner's competence. It also highlights that where appropriate, the term also refers to the individual's organization. Here, I just want to point out that although we recognize that it could be experts, external experts organization or whatnot that provides a report to the PA, the professional accountant that's using their work. However, all these provisions, the next elements I'll go through, they really apply to the individual external expert that is in charge of that of the work that's being done, and is ultimately has that underlying expertise and is in charge of the team members, etc. Okay, and then revised definitions, that is in relation to external expert. So we've kept the extant concept that was previously already in the code and aligned with the IAASB. However, expanded it to incorporate the perspectives of the PAIBs, so for professional accountants in business for Section 220, and also expanded it for sustainability assurance practitioners so that it also flows through to the ISA in Part 5. So this expansion is essentially highlighting that external expert is an expert engaged either by the professional accountant, its employing organization, or its firm, or by the sustainability assurance practitioner. So these are the 3 key changes to the definition section. With respect to the scoping, aside from what Ken mentioned with in regards to the interoperability with the IAASB standards as to what the standard does and does not cover. Furthermore, the standard also is explicit that it does not cover the work of management's expert, as explained by Ken, because it's viewed as work of management, and the code's conceptual framework applies in that sense. Also, what is not subcontractors that might be experts in their own element, but these subcontractors are under the direction, supervision, and review of the professional accountant, so they are also not under the remit of this standard. Other information provided by external sources for general use, so it could be data from, say, Bloomberg for purposes of benchmarking or other benchmarking information. And furthermore, the standard does not scope in close business relationships with an external expert, for example, where PA or its firm might be going into market together with external expert. So on the next slide, and yeah, this describes the second element of the ethical framework, the new ethical framework. And this is the underlying premise that when a professional accountant has determined that it needs to use an external expert because it has insufficient expertise to perform its professional service, before to ensure that such expert needs to have the necessary competence, capabilities, and objectivity for the professional accountant's purpose. And this concept is aligned with what's contained in the ISA 620 as well. And so the PA needs to evaluate this external expert for the competence, capabilities, and objectivities for the PA's purpose. And so within the standard, there are factors that are relevant to evaluating this competence and capabilities of the external expert. And given the natural overlap of the performance standards and ethical standards in relation to using the work of an external expert, you also note that these factors will be familiar with respect to the ISA 620, so it's fully aligned in that respect as well. In addition, there's also factors that are relevant in identifying and evaluating threats to objectivity and examples of actions that might be safeguards to address threats to the external expert's objectivity. And in relation to all three aspects, CCO, there's guidance as to where information for this evaluation might be obtained. Importantly, and this was highlighted through the exposure process, the standard also emphasizes that the evaluation of CCO of an external expert really leans on the exercise of the professional accountant's professional judgment and also the application of the reasonable and informed third-party test as set out in the code for this CCO evaluation. So whether or not a reasonable and informed third party would draw the same conclusions when presented with the same facts and circumstances as the PA. Finally, this point as well on pressure, that's the last bullet point there on the slide. This was also drawn out in the exposure process where respondents also highlighted that there's a risk that professional accountants might face pressure to conclude in a certain way on the competence, capabilities, and objectivity of an external expert when that external expert's work potentially has already been significantly completed or near completion. So that expert's work is near completion and the PA is still evaluating its CCO and has not yet concluded. So there could be a higher risk of pressure to breach the code. So this has also been highlighted in the standard. Finally, and importantly, the standard is explicit in the prohibition that the professional accountant shall not use the work of an external expert if the PA has determined or cannot determine that such expert has the necessary CCO for the PA's purpose. On the next slide, please. So what I mentioned just now, that is the element and the requirement that is applicable to all professional services. So it would include PAs in public practice who do non-assurance services as well as audit and other assurance services. However, because of the heightened stakeholders' expectations for external experts that are used in audits, reviews, or other assurance engagements, there are additional requirements within the standard, and that's for the PA to obtain information from the external expert to support the additional rigor expected of the PA's evaluation of the external expert's objectivity. So this additional information that's required from the external expert, these attributes are based on the code's independence attributes. So you'll see it's information about, for example, financial interests, loans and guarantees, close business relationships, conflicts of interests, previous positions as a director or employee, etc. On the next slide, please. So how it as an overview as well, the request for information is delineated between the request with respect to a non-PI audit client and delineated with respect to a PI audit client. So for a non-PI client, for a non-PI audit client engagement and review and sustainability assurance engagement not within the scoping criteria of Part 5, the professional accountant is required to request information from the external expert on 3 matters. So that'll be on financial interests, conflicts of interest, and also previous and current engagements. Then there's an additional requirement for the PA to consider the need to request any additional information from the external expert to facilitate its evaluation. And in this regard, application material is there to support this consideration, recognizing that there's a range of facts and circumstances that might be faced by a non-PI client. It could be less complex, whereby the risk of these of more interest relationships and circumstances with the external expert is lower, or it could be more complex, where the risk could be higher. So there's factors added to support the PA in its consideration of whether or not to request additional information. For PI audit clients, if we just go click one next slide, please. Thank you. For PI audit clients, as per the ED, the PA is requested to request a very extended list of specific matters to evaluate objectivity. You'll see the extended list goes from sub-bullet A to sub-bullet O. So there's quite a number of matters to facilitate this evaluation. Finally, and this is on the next slide, and this is with respect to when the entity at which, and this is for all audit clients, the PA must also request the external expert to provide such information, whether aligned with whether it's a non-PI or PI, from the rest of the external experts team members. So the external experts team members need to also provide such information. And also, when the external expert is not when the external expert is performing work at an entity, which is not the client, the professional accountant's client directly, there's also a requirement for the PA to request a more limited set of information with respect to the external expert's relationships with the client in order to facilitate the objectivity evaluation. And similar to the non-PI situation, the PA in this circumstance then needs to consider or not, based on the facts and circumstances, whether there is a need to request additional information to facilitate the objectivity evaluation. So this is the overview of the information request and the way it's done. I'll just go through on the next slide, please. Oh, my apologies, that's on the next slide. But firstly, this is a snapshot of the factors that are contained in the standard when the PA to facilitate a PA to consider whether or not to request more information. So as I mentioned, it surrounds, for example, the complexity of the external expert's work, the impact of the external expert's work on the engagement, the scale of the external expert's practice, etc. So really to help the PA determine whether the probability of whether or not there are more interest relationships and circumstances that could be possible between the external expert and the entity at which it's performing work. On the next slide, we did note, and this was also raised by the PIOB observer during our last few meetings, were questions with respect to how the external expert can provide the information on all these matters to the professional accountant. And so in finalizing the standard, the IAASB did recognize it is very important to ensure that when the external expert provides the information, there is a level of care and thoughtfulness applied by the external expert when they're responding to those questions and requests for information. And also, it's important to reduce the possibility of any misunderstanding between the external expert and the PA. For example, if it was just an oral or verbal response, it's better. So you can see that for all the information requests, it must be in writing and it must be received in writing. So you just click to the next slide. It shows, we show here, there's a cycle, we have a closed loop. Firstly, when the professional accountant agrees the terms of engagement with the external expert must agree that it will provide information to support the objectivity evaluation in writing. And this is only for audits and reviews circumstance, so not for INAS. And then specifically for the additional objectivity requirements for audits and reviews when external experts are used, again, the PA must request the external expert to provide information in writing in relation to all those specified circumstances. And then finally, the PA must ensure that it actually managed to obtain this information in writing. So it's really just to consolidate this loop and elevate that care and thoughtfulness. It's also seen that when the PA receives all this information from the external expert, in actuality or in practicality, it's a form of record, essentially a record of all these matters from the external expert, which obviously the PA needs to further evaluate to assess, to conclude on the external expert's objectivity. On the next slide.
So sorry, Cam, maybe I'll just mention something here. Just if you just could, Michelle, if you could just go to the previous slide. So this issue of having the expert provide the information requested in writing was debated at quite some length at IAASB during the course of the last few meetings. As Cam mentioned, it was an issue that was raised by certain regulatory respondents. It was also emphasized by PIUB that the PIB really wanted to see that element of rigor brought into the provisions through the documentation to be received from the external expert, and importantly, to make sure that the professional accountant, the auditor, would have in their own documentation evidence that they've requested the information, that they have received the information, and so forth. And the reason why this was important is because the request that goes to the external expert is based on the expert providing the information to the best of their knowledge and belief. So that concept of to the best of their knowledge and belief attracted quite a bit of discussion, because there was a perception that it wasn't rigorous enough. And that and there was a concern that the external expert might just very casually kind of glance at the list of information requested and kind of just respond with a no. So therefore, hence, that's that sense that there were needed to be something built into the provisions, built into the standard that would really elevate that element of care and thoughtfulness and rigor that the expert would apply in considering the information requests. There were questions, in fact, as to whether the code should specify specific steps that the external expert ought to take in gathering the information that's requested and then providing it to the auditor. But at our board felt that the code couldn't go down that path, because the code doesn't have sort of a remit to deal with external experts directly. So that's a bit of the basis, the background, if you will, behind the provisions that really address this issue of having the confirmation, the information being provided from the external expert in writing. Okay, Cam, you can continue.
Okay, thanks, Ken. That's very helpful context as well. And then we covered the information requests, and that's the breadth and how it's done. And now it's the period covered by the information request. So essentially, as a broad overarching view, the IAASB intends for the PA to be able to conclude on the external expert's objectivity from the period covered by the audit review, or other assurance report through to the issuance of that report. However, at the same time, considering all the practicalities of the information request, when the PA is actually requesting the external expert for information on a specified list at a point in time, it is very likely that the external expert won't have the foresight to know whether or not it might have potentially certain interest relationships until the issuance of that report. So it's forward-looking. So just next slide here. There's a bit of animation, but so in the request for information, it's very specific that all those matters are from the beginning of the period covered by the report until the completion of the external expert's work. So that recognizes the expert's work could be completed before the report ends. However, in order to ensure that obviously any changes in such objective in the information provided is communicated to the PA so that the PA has the opportunity to evaluate it and ensure that until the issuance of the report, the external expert's objectivity is still appropriate. Just on the next slide here, there's a requirement also for the external expert to communicate such changes in any changes in the information provided, and the professional accountant must evaluate such changes. To facilitate this sort of subsequent changes in matters from the external expert. When agreeing the terms of engagement, there's also a requirement that the external expert must agree to communicate any changes in the information it has provided. So that's essentially the period covered. And on the next slide, this is the fourth element of the framework. So we've gone through essentially the requirement that a PA must evaluate whether or not the external expert has the necessary CCO for its purpose. And for audits and reviews and other assurance, there's a whole additional step with respect to additional objectivity evaluation. And finally, this is concluding on the external expert's CCO. And you can see that in essence, the professional accountant is prohibited from using the work of an external expert if one, the PA is unable to conclude that the external expert is, this actually should be competent, capable, or objective, or if the PA has concluded that the external expert is not competent, capable, and objective. And so on the next slide, we'll go through a little bit about what are the circumstances when the PA is unable to conclude on CCO. So this could be there could be some circumstances, and this was raised also by stakeholders during the consultation process, that there could be confidentiality concerns or privacy concerns in relation to the information being requested. It could be, for example, due to law and regulation. It could be due to an inability to obtain consent from their immediate family members or their employing organization to disclose certain, essentially the list of information being required. Or it could just be an outright refusal by the external expert, potentially subsequent to agreeing the terms of engagement due to whatever it may be, business reasons or whatnot. All these circumstances essentially lead to the professional accountant being unable to evaluate the external expert's objectivity. When they're unable to do so, that means they're unable to conclude on whether or not the external expert has the necessary objectivity for its purpose. And so therefore, the provisions, the standards also explicit that the PA, the professional accountant, cannot use the work of an external expert in such circumstances. It's viewed that if you allow such circumstances or exceptions, it essentially lowers the threshold for this objectivity, because I mean, in the first place, the professional accountant was not able to conclude on its evaluation. And it could lower the perception of the reliability of the external expert's work. Okay, so then on the next slide, this is the fifth element, and essentially this is drawing out the code's conceptual framework. And when the PA, this is fine, these are finally the threats to the professional accountant itself. So when it uses the work of an external expert that is indeed competent and capable and objective, however, there are still facts and circumstances that might create threats to the PA's compliance with the fundamental principles when using the external expert's work. So there are examples of these facts and circumstances, and also factors relevant to the evaluation, examples of safeguards, and additionally, application material as well on the communication with those charged with governments, documentation, etc. I think this takes us to the end of the deck. Next slide, please. And Ken, I just wanted to hand it back to you to see if you wanted to add on anything.
Well, thank you very much, Cam. I think I think you've been quite comprehensive, really, in walking us through the ethical framework that's built now into the standard. So, Tom, maybe I'll pass it back to you to see if there are any questions or comments.
Any questions and comments for Ken and Cam? It was very clearly done. Josephine?
Thank you. Thank you so much, Ken and Cam. Really appreciate that. Really nice summary of what was obviously a lot of hard work in the background there. And congratulations again on the approval. I just wanted to understand something which I thought I had misunderstood when I was reading through the ED. The information request is only in respect of audit and review, but not in respect of assurance services. So, and I just want to make sure I've got that right. So in the case of, can't help myself, a sustainability assurance engagement, you wouldn't have to go through that loop process in the same manner. Is that right? Or did I just completely misunderstand you? Thank you.
No, go ahead, Cam.
Yeah, and maybe so it does include its audits, reviews, and other assurance. So that additional loop does go through that loop. Yeah.
Okay, thank you. I'm sorry, I thought it was just audit and reviews. Appreciate that.
Anyone else? Sammy?
Just a very quick question. I didn't read the effective date of the new requirement, but disregarding what the effective date would be, would early application be allowed?
Yes, so it would be December 15, 2026, so aligned with ISO and aligned with ISO 5000, and early adoption is allowed. Yeah.
Okay. Robert?
Just a practical question. Assuming that an expert doesn't have the objectivity according to your catalog, due to conflict of interest or whatsoever, have you considered a so-called cooling off period when he would reclaim or could reclaim objectivity again? Question mark.
It's a good question, Robert. The answer is no. This wasn't considered as part of IAASB's deliberations. The understanding is that the expert would be used for a particular engagement. And if the expert doesn't fulfill the necessary CCO, the competence, capabilities, and objectivity requirements, then the expert won't be able to be used, as Cam spoke about earlier. Now, that said, the fact that the auditor, and let's take the case of an audit, if the auditor isn't able to go ahead and use the work of that external expert, that wouldn't preclude the auditor from considering the same individual, the same expert organization for another engagement in the future. So it is, in effect, on an engagement case basis that the expert's work is being considered.
Okay. Well, thank you, Cam, for joining us rather late in the day there. Ken, thank you for joining us and providing guidance. I think at this point, it's time to turn to Dan.
Well, thank you, Tom. And again, thanks to Ken and Cam for that important background information for this board to set up this particular discussion. This is the kickoff discussion for the narrow scope amendments project. And I don't have a fancy slide here for the project team, but there is more than me. The project team actually also includes Kazuko and our resident technical advisor expert on using the work of experts, Jamie. And Jamie was actually quite an important part of our coordination discussions with IAASB and ISSA 5000. So for today, you get to hear from me, but going forward, and particularly in March, you'll probably hear a little bit more from Kazuko and from Jamie. So Michelle, if we could go to the next slide, please. This brief overview really just summarizes what's in the issues paper, agenda item 6. I want to do a quick flyby before we get into the board discussion. This discussion is directional. It's intended to get board input and agreement on the purpose and the scope of this narrow scope project. And that's to provide a basis for the project team to go ahead and develop a project proposal, as well as ultimately an exposure draft that would include any necessary targeted amendments to the IAASB standards. First, just a note on the purpose. Can say it many times. The purpose is to consider targeted amendments, and targeted means just that. It's only what is needed to make sure that the IAASB standards can work together with these revisions to the code related to using the work of an external expert that Ken and Cam have just described. So in terms of the scope, when you think about experts, naturally everyone will think about ISO 620. But as pointed out in the paper, this narrow scope project is not a complete review and revision of ISO 620. You think about it from the standpoint of interoperability with these new provisions in the code relating to external experts, by primarily be focused on paragraph 9 of ISO 620, which is the core requirement to evaluate the CCO of an expert, and of course the related application material that goes along with paragraph 9. There's another aspect, and Ken and Cam alluded to it in their presentation, and that's a question about whether the standard needs to be more explicit about prohibiting the use of the work of an external expert if that expert does not possess the necessary competence, capabilities, and expertise for the particular purposes of the engagement. In terms of scope, it's not just about 620. Ken and Cam mentioned that the provisions in the code apply to all professional services. So part of this project will be to look at other IAASB standards noted on the slide there, and there's some specific paragraphs that were mentioned in the issues paper. That's not to mean that there's anything wrong with those paragraphs in those standards or that any changes need to be made, just that those are where experts are referenced in those particular standards. So we will have a look, the project team will, to see if there are any targeted amendments that might be necessary there. Before we step away from 620, and maybe to address any questions that the board might have, in the strategy and work plan for 2024 to 2027, there is a reference to a reserve project on ISA 620. And Willie, maybe I could ask you to clarify for the board what that is. It's certainly not this project, and what that project, what that reference is in the work plan.
Yes, thank you, Dan. And the board will remember when we approved our strategy and work plan last year at this meeting, we did have 3 topics that we put into the category of reserve topics. So just based on the balance in terms of the priority of the other topics that we considered for our strategy and work plan, and obviously balancing that with our capacity and resources, those were 3 projects that just didn't make it to the list that we had at that point. And those 3 projects are ISA 620, ISA 720, and then also the assurance on digital reporting or digital report tagging. And that's why they ended up with the proviso that obviously, depending on changes in the environment and needs at the particular time, because our work plan covers a 4-year period, there's always a possibility that we could elevate those projects. Now, as Dan has indicated, apart from that, this narrow scope project was in the work plan. So that was in our table. It was allocated time. So this is the narrow scope project that we are considering now. And as Dan has said, and as we said in the issues paper as well, this is not a full revision of ISA 620. So just to give you a little bit of a flavor, so when we did consult on our strategy and work plan, 620 was one of the topics that we consulted on. And we heard feedback, for example, and I'll just give you a little bit of a flavor of that, where there were mixed views. There were stakeholders that thought that ISA 620 is completely sufficiently principle-based and there's no need to revisit the standards. But there were other stakeholders, including monitoring group members, that supported the revision of ISA 620 for reasons such as aligning the concepts in ISA 620 with concepts we use in ISA 540, with concepts at that point in ED 500, with concepts we use in ISA 220 revised. So there was a number of linkages, questions raised, and could some of those parallel concepts be brought into 620 to make 620 stronger? There was comments around we need better guidance for when the auditor should actually be using the work of an expert, when there is a need to use the work of an expert. We also heard comments about the impact of technology. So should we reconsider 620 in terms of when the expert uses emerging technologies or black box technologies or technologies like that, as well as where the area of expertise is technology related. So they were our commentators on the work plan consultation was not as adventurous as Warren would have liked. So they didn't raise the question about if experts will continue to only be human beings, but that only came up recently. So, and then there were also comments around regulatory findings in terms of the work effort around deciding whether the work of an expert is adequate and how that equates or leads to sufficient appropriate audit evidence. And then there was also the overriding aspect that this all needs to flow through, not to only audits of financial statements, but also to other assurance engagements. So I just wanted to give you a little bit of flavor that if we really dig into 620, there's much more to look at than what the intention is to look at during this project. So we just wanted to clarify that distinction.
Thank you for that, Billy. And again, just to confirm that this is all about interoperability with these new provisions in the code. The last bit on this slide, whether there's any other ISAs that may need to be looked at, we don't think there is much there, but the project team will have a look at the other ISAs to see if there might be anything that would need to be considered. Michelle, the next slide, please. In terms of, as described in the paper, what is not in scope, first of all, ISSA 5000 for a couple of reasons, just finalized, so not much appetite to revisit it, but it goes beyond that. There really is no need to to do so because the performance requirements in ISSA 5000 on using the work of experts are consistent with ISA 3000 as well as ISO 620. And there were some changes that the board that were made. The board will remember based on comments on exposure to actually bring in more from ISO 620 on evaluating whether the work of an expert is adequate for the practitioner's purposes. And also regarding connectivity with IAASB, if you recall from the September joint session, there was a discussion, and as Ken and Cam have already summarized this morning, the boards are in alignment on the key aspects. There was a question that was raised in the coordination discussions, and it was alluded to earlier, about whether the work of an external expert could be used if that expert does not possess the necessary competence, capabilities, and objectivity. As explained in the paper, the view of this board was that it's implicit in the requirements in ISO 620 and in 5000 that the work of that expert could not be used if they did not possess the necessary CCO. However, it's now explicit in the provisions in the code. So one of the things the board agreed in 5000, ISSA 5000, was to add a bridge paragraph. It's paragraph A145 in the application material that basically mirrors the wording in the requirements in section 390. It's paragraph 21 of section 390 and 5390. But that application material is in 5000, it's not in 620. So one consideration, and maybe a quickest fix, is to consider whether a similar application material paragraph could be added to ISO 620. That would address questions about whether that work could be used, and also would put 620 and 5000 in alignment. 3410, probably pretty explanatory. The board has already decided to withdraw that standard in accordance with due process when ISSA 5000 becomes effective, and that will become effective at the same time that these new code provisions are effective. So next slide, Michelle, please. Also mentioned in the issues paper, and obviously an important part of the project proposal and ultimately the explanatory memorandum and consideration for the project team and the board as we go through this are the relevant qualitative standard setting characteristics. Those are mentioned in the paper, and shortly we'll ask the board if you have any questions about those or whether anything might be missing. So next slide, please, Michelle, and Tom, I'll turn it back to you. And this is just to get the board's input on whether it agrees with the proposed purpose and scope of this narrow scope project as it's been described, and whether you have any comments on the qualitative standard setting characteristics as described in the paper. Thank you.
Okay, and which means it's not a discussion of the type of project Philly was describing for 620 in the future, nor is it a discussion of conclusions that IAASB has reached on its work in this area. Any comments on 1 and 2 here? Or if not, silence will be taken as support for the work that's been presented. Sue?
So the work that's been presented is good. I have a few little comments. I'll send them offline, and you can sort of reflect on those. I probably wanted to sort of come in more at a bigger picture angle, because this is we are in the process of finishing off a limited scope project, and I think we maybe need to sort of sit back and reflect on what we might have learned in this part of the process. I was very, very pleased, Dan, to hear the kind of descriptions you've got about the the quite detailed work you've obviously had going on during this process. So hopefully there's alignment around, you know, where you've talked about the things that need fixing. But I think, you know, as I reflect on the project we are just completing, it has been noticeable how when you take some fairly high level principles and try and pull them down into the real nuts and bolts of an individual audit, there are a lot of practical issues that surface out when you come to exposure. So I suppose I'd probably just express a degree of professional skepticism around, you know, the kind of timelines, and when we talk about this being, you know, being straightforward, quick, whatever, to just be kind of alert to that. So that's really just the broad comment. In terms of your, you raised a question about 5,000 and whether there was a kind of corresponding application link paragraph. I would support that. I think as practitioners are developing methodologies and so on, they are looking to 620. So I think the more that we can support that, I think that would be helpful. Thanks.
Wendy?
Thank you, Tom, and thank you, Dan. This does bring together a comment you made over the summer when we had that meeting, and you made a comment about 620, which I didn't understand then, which I understand now. But I have some of the same concerns as Sue. First, I'm going to say I can't really argue with anything that's in this issues paper. Makes sense. And if it really is as little as, you know, making sure that we're using the right words for external expert and something like A145, I don't have any issues with that. I do step back and wonder what will be the implications, or are there other implications, and, you know, will the timing overlap for 620 or the reserve project timing? Will it overlap with this timing in any way, or anything that comes out of the audit evidence risk response project? So overall, I have the issues paper is great. It's narrow scope.
Okay. Julie?
And I'm in the same place, Dan, as far as your explanation and the issues paper. So I don't have any real comments on what was provided, but having now listened to what Cam described as that she had a visual there around where the arrows went, where you sort of start the process, the writing process, if I can call it that, and then the different steps in that process. The automatic thing that comes to my mind is, how are we going to explain the operationalizing of that process? So we can write the words in the standard, and that's fine. But I think there'll be quite a number of comments about, what does it mean in writing? What do I have to have in my file? You can probably see where I'm going with this. Is there's going to be sort of, how do I operationalize this so that it's one, meeting the requirements, but two, meeting the requirements in, I'll say, in the most pragmatic way, because there could be a lot of sort of shuffling of documents back and forth, maybe unnecessarily. So maybe you already have that on your short list, but I think trying to think about some of those real practical questions as you proceed would be something to keep in mind.
Okay, Ada, and then Eric.
Thank you. Just wanted to come in on Julie's comment, because I clearly see the difficulties in operationalizing this, but I'm not at all convinced that our standard needs to cover that. Because we refer to the ethical requirements that are set for us, and any operationalization should be covered by them, not by us.
Eric?
Yeah, I'm probably in the same boat as Edo and Julie. It was just not clear to me what changes need to be made to 620 now, if any, and whether the issue is more one of non-authoritative guidance in the meantime until we do our full review of 620 and work through it. So I wasn't totally clear on that.
Okay, anyone else? Dan?
Well, thanks to all of you, and obviously, as I mentioned, the project team will take all of this input, consider the revisions to the code, and have a look at these targeted paragraphs in 620 to begin with, paragraph 9, as well as a related application material. The question about operationalizing some of these the code provisions. I just an initial reaction is that I agree with Ado that that is more an IAASB question. It's how to apply the relevant ethical requirements, and all of this is falling under the umbrella in the IAASB standards of the auditor or the practitioner being required to comply with relevant ethical requirements. If you're using the work of an expert or an external expert, there are certain relevant ethical requirements that come into play and would have to be complied with. That doesn't rule out the possibility that there could be a few words of application material added to ISO 620 as an example to acknowledge that relevant ethical requirements may include specific provisions relating to obtaining information about that would be part of the evaluation of the objectivity of an external expert or something along those lines to provide a little more bridging between the code and the IAASB standards at this point. Again, in the interests and in the context of interoperability now of the standards with these new provisions in the code. So thank you again for your input. We will be back in March with a project proposal and perhaps a draft or at least an outline of an exposure draft with the amendments, targeted amendments that the board can provide input on at that time. Tom, thank you.
Great, thanks very much. Before we exit this topic, Philippe, any perspectives of the PIOB?
Thank you, Tom. No, the PIOB was fully satisfied by this project. With the coordination it implies and the alignment between the code and the standards, and no particular remark in addition to that.
Okay, so thank you to the team. Thank you, Ken. Thank you, Cam. Could I ask the audit evidence and risk response team to come back to the table? Right now, we're going to pick up where we left off on that project, and so hopefully we can get back up and running in about 2 minutes. So I don't want anyone to go away. Michelle, could we get that presentation back on the screen? So when we left off on audit evidence and risk response, we got to through the issues and proposed actions. So we were getting to the paragraph 29, basis of proposed actions, right? Who am I handed off to here? Anna.
Thank you. Yes. So next up, we would welcome your views on paragraphs 29 to 39, where the majority of the changes were editorial clarifications, I would dare say. To start with, we wanted to highlight in particular the possibility of non-authoritative guidance being part of the output of the project as well. So we made sure to flag that. And we clarified some other matters. So hopefully the changes made sense, but I'll pause at this point.
Any comments on paragraphs 29 to 39? I'm taking that as support. Okay. Next.
Michelle, can we please move to the next slide? So now we're into the last sections of the project proposal. So the changes here really was to reflect the updates to the timetable to reflect the current work plan activities as with respect to the audit evidence and risk response project. And then to reflect some of the changes to the description of the project resources based on the current, the future operationalization of the staff-led model. Struggle with the words there, forgive me. Tom.
Okay, so this is 40 through 48, inclusive of the timetable for the project and resources. Edo?
Yes, apologies, Tom. I didn't have my document open quick enough to see where we were, so I'm going to come in.
Go back to the last section.
The last section, and I just wanted, so in respect of the actions that are illustrated all throughout, because it applies to all of them, there are a number of actions that say explore, consider, or determine whether. And I very much read those as the project team can decide not to pursue it because it's not necessary. And I expect in a number of cases that indeed to be the case. And I just wanted to confirm whether I read that correctly.
Well, I have a question. I don't think the project teams make the board makes decisions. So it would come to the board to determine, okay, we've considered we're not going to do anything. But I couldn't.
That would be the suggestion of the task force or the project team.
Of the team, right? Okay. As much as I love the project team, the board still is the place of accountability here. Okay, any comments on the timetable either? And the remaining parts of the project proposal through the appendix? Great. Back to you.
Jasper, I think I throw back to you the last part of the session.
Yeah, I think we have one last question. If you go to the next slide, whether there's anything else, any other matters that the board wants to raise in respect of the project proposal?
Anything that people would like to raise? I think one of my observations for this morning, we got a number of helpful suggestions and refinements, but nothing I really heard would be fatal flaws as it relates to the project proposal. I say this because now we're going to ask the team to go back and do their best to reconcile, but there will be some things that they do and some things that they won't do, and they're going to use their professional judgment to make those calls. This may leave someone dissatisfied in this room, or maybe people, but I just want to keep it in context that in general, it seems that this board is happy with the direction of this project proposal, and that I hope when we get back to that, we will look at it in its totality and then make our decision whether it's sufficient to go. But in my read is that no one has expressed a major fatal flaw with this project proposal. And of course, there's a lot of unresolved issues, but that's the nature of a project proposal. Is that a fair assessment? Okay. Before we close this topic, I wanted to call upon Philippe from any PIOB perspectives on the project proposal before we have the team go back and consider any revisions.
Thank you, Tom. No particular comment on that, considering what I said before during the discussion we had. That's all. For the rest, good luck for the work to be done.
Thank you. We all could use some luck. Yeah, anything else from the project team?
I don't know why I went first, but I just wanted to say thank you because all of the comments that we've received can only have enhanced the project proposal. So I mostly just wanted to thank you all for your input, and in particular to our focus group members who have provided really valuable sort of direction, guidance throughout the project proposal development. So at this point, just thank you for that.
And Anna, maybe to add to that, like the tomorrow afternoon, we'll provide you with an updated project proposal. So you have a nice Wednesday evening to read through it together with all the other proposals.
What I was thinking about my Wednesday evening. High on the list. Okay, that's great. We're back on track. We're gonna break for lunch right now. You get an hour break. We'll convene at 10 minutes, very precisely after the hour of 1 here. Warren and Josephine, you could take a break too, maybe even have an early dinner. And we'll see everyone shortly. Good sessions this morning. Thank you. Oh, the PI task force is meeting where?
Green room.
In the green room.
And the focus group for audit evidence and risk response is meeting. No, sorry, we're meeting in the green room. And the PI task force meeting in the orange room.
I'm gonna have to question the CCO of my advisor here on meeting locations, but that's another topic altogether.
Okay.